This is episode 27 of the Women in Depth podcast. The information found in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I hope all of you enjoyed the holidays, that you were able to spend time with the people you love and spend some time doing the things that are important and meaningful for you. As for me, it was a good holiday, except I got sick. And as you can hear, my voice is not exactly 100%, but it's a lot better. So I apologize in advance for how I'm sounding. Today's topic is one that I feel so many women can relate to, and that is the experience of being lost in motherhood. As a mom, I can say that being lost is a frequent state of being, and in this episode, I just think that whether you're a new mom of a newborn, or your children are in school, or whether your children are teens or your children are adults, there's something in this podcast for every mother who's ever felt lost, who's ever felt overwhelmed. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the interview. Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, my guest is Kirsten Goffena. Kirsten is a play therapist and healer who specializes in supporting women who feel lost in motherhood. In her Fort Collins, Colorado practice, Kirsten and her certified therapy dog, Luna, help children and families strengthen their relationships by healing trauma and attachment wounds. Kirsten is passionate about helping mothers find balance in their lives by reconnecting to themselves and their own playfulness. Kirsten just launched an online community for moms called Lost in Motherhood. Kirsten, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Oh gosh, it's my pleasure, Lourdes. Thank you for having me.
Kirsten, would you share a little bit more about yourself with our listeners?
Absolutely. So as you said, I am a therapist in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I practice play therapy and a lot of alternative modalities, sand play and art, and I have a therapy dog, Luna. So that's my brick and mortar practice here in Fort Collins. And then, as you mentioned also, I just recently launched a online community and a Facebook group for mothers who feel like they have lost themselves in the role of motherhood.
I think that being lost in motherhood is more common of an experience than people realize. And even when, I know as a mom, even when it maybe looked like I thought I knew what I was doing, I was pretty lost.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right, Lourdes. It is a very common experience, and I don't think people put really that language to it. And the other thing is you don't really realize you're lost until sometimes you're so far down that road that you've really forgotten who you are and what your likes are, anything about yourself. It's just all about your children and all about your spouse and all about everyone else. So, yeah, it's pretty common for women.
How did you come to this place where you decided to create this community, to create this resource? What inspired you to move in that direction?
That's a great question. So in my practice, my therapy practice, I see children and a lot of children, and I work also with their parents. And I was just really noticing that I really enjoyed helping mothers really find themselves. And I realized that the children's struggles were directly correlated with how much a mother had sort of lost herself in the role of mothering and forgotten who she was. And, here's a personal sort of part of my story too, which I think is often the case with therapists, is, my own journey was I was very lost in motherhood when my children became teenagers. And that was the point when I decided to go back to graduate school and kind of take my life back again. So I really empathize with and can connect with, these parents. And it's not always just mothers. I mean, I've realized, there are some fathers and other caretakers who may not even have children, but, I just, to hone in on a population as sort of specifically working with mothers, but it's not limited to a woman or necessarily a parent, this idea of getting lost in the lives of others.
So you mentioned, and I want to make sure that I understood this correctly, that you began to see a connection between the challenges or the struggles that children were having and how lost or disconnected the mother had become from herself. Yes,
I did. It manifests in so many different ways, but one of the very common ways, or a thread that I see quite often, is, a lot of anxiety from the parent or from the mother about their child's, academic progress, or whether they have friendships, and basically just a lot of anxiety, like heightened anxiety around how well their child is doing, to the point where the child feels suffocated and isn't able to individuate and sort of start having their own voice and being their own person, because, the mother is just so connected to that child. That's sort of one way it manifests, and I see that fairly frequently. And obviously that's not good for either one in the relationship. Everybody needs their own life, really, is the bottom line there. And it happens so gradually and so imperceptibly that we're not even really aware it happens. I mean, it really happens mostly in women who are caretakers and nurturers and just really caring and loving. So it comes from this beautiful, light place where this parent or this mother is trying to do the best that they can for their child, and they want so badly for their child to do well and feel good and be happy and all of those things. And sort of, the paradox is that in them caring so much, their child then struggles more because they don't have the space to, like I said, individuate and just sort of grow and make mistakes, right? And fail, because that's a part of life and a part of growth. And I think, I see a lot of parents who try and prevent their child from experiencing failure and struggle. And I'm certainly, putting myself in that category. I mean, that definitely happened to me as well.
And that is so hard as a mom. I can relate to that too, that you just want to spare your child any suffering or discomfort.
Yes.
Not realizing that is part of the experience that they need,
Yes, absolutely, Lourdes, absolutely.
I was also thinking, when you were sharing how the mother's desire to just nourish or nurture and her deep care and love, how that can turn out to be detrimental. It really reminds me too of, coming from a depth psychology perspective, how our brightest lights, our greatest gifts also have shadow qualities, and the shadow quality of perhaps loving too much or caring too much, trying to protect too much, is that you create this, like you said, this crowdedness. You take up that space so the child isn't able to unfold.
That's absolutely beautifully said, Lourdes. And yes, it's the truth, right? I mean, these are light and wonderful and beautiful things, but too much of a good thing tends to end up not such a great thing in the end. And it's really hard to come to terms with that. And, I also see a lot of perfectionism in, the mothers who find themselves in this place. And a lot of sort of, I see it a lot in parents, not always. I mean, it's across the board whether parents are working outside of the home or not, but certainly in parents who have chosen, or mothers who have chosen to be at home raising their kids, that is their role. And so when their children are struggling, they feel like it's their role to fix it, probably even more so than parents who aren't with their children 24/7.
Wow. And I think too that, with moms feeling so responsible for everything, that it's very difficult for them to, I can just see them struggling with guilt and feeling helpless
and
incompetent. I mean, I can relate to all of those.
That's absolutely right. And there's so much shaming too of parents in our culture, and these expectations that you can do it all. And, it's just not real. Reality is that there is pain and suffering, and we do have to, allow our children to fall and then brush themselves off and get back up, on their own much of the time. And we get to be there with them, as a sort of a foundational, solid, a place for them to come home to, but not trying to, sort of fix everything. And I think, for children who have parents who do this, they stop coming to their parents. And then they go to their friends or they go to others because they know that they don't want their problems fixed. They just need somebody to listen.
Don't we all? Isn't that what we all want?
Yes.
Yeah. Don't fix me. Just be there for me. Listen. Create a space to hold what I'm bringing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you spoke earlier about the lost in motherhood, meaning the mother losing her sense of self, her connection to herself, because she is so invested in the mothering role. Can you share how this can show up in a woman's life, this process of no longer being connected to her own authentic self?
And again, Lourdes, it's a gradual process, so it's almost imperceptible. You're not even realizing that it's happening to you. It just happens slowly over time. And I think, most of the time when a mother gets to the point when they recognize something is wrong, they've usually gone so far down that road that they've, either had some kind of breakdown, or as Brene Brown calls it, a spiritual awakening. But, something will bring them to their knees, right? It may be that their child acts out and ends up in court, or using drugs and alcohol, or it could be something big like that, or is in a relationship at an early age, or sexually active. And there could be all sorts of ways that it manifests, ending up that this mother then feels like she's a failure as a mother, and she literally has a panic attack or some kind of breakdown or some health issues. I see a lot of mothers who come in and they've literally had things like adrenal failure or even a stroke. I saw in one mother, and this is all directly related to her trying to be everything for everyone else and neglecting herself in the process. So, usually you're not really aware of it until the universe gives you a big sign, and it's a wake-up call to do something different. And just to sort of segue from that too, I think the work that I'm doing and the reason I developed Lost in Motherhood was for two reasons. One of them is that I really want to help younger mothers prevent this, prevent becoming lost in their role of mother and just holding on to who they are and making sure they take care of themselves. And the other piece is helping mothers who already are lost find their way back home. And that population of mothers tends to be mothers with maybe adult children who may or may not live in the home. And these children are, 20, 30, even 40 years old, and they're still making mistakes, and their parents or their mother is still rescuing them and caring for them, and they are becoming depleted. I have several clients who are grandparents to raising their grandchildren because their own children have made these mistakes over and over again. So for me, I'm really passionate about helping these mothers who are younger and haven't fallen into this trap yet to sort of prevent it. And how do you do that? And then also, like I said, sort of, helping the mothers who already are there develop good boundaries and a sense of self again.
And so when you are working with moms, what can this process look like? And I can see that it might be different depending on if it's a mom with younger children or a mom with teens. But could you share a little bit about how a woman can begin to find her way back to herself?
Absolutely. So, it's interesting because, yes, it looks different. And at the end of the day, it's all the same, right? It's just how far along that spectrum have you gone? So with the mothers of my clients who are young children, it's a lot easier to heal from that or to see it, because you're right in there with it, with your children, sort of recognizing that you're slowly fading away, that maybe the hobbies you used to engage in are no longer a part of your life, that maybe the friends that you have are not your friends, but they're parents of your children's friends, and you suddenly find yourself in this world that you didn't create, but it just sort of happened to you. That you're not getting enough sleep, that you're not making time for yourself, that you suddenly feel like all of your time is dedicated to others. Teenagers are a little bit more tricky because teenagers just unleash an awful lot of past trauma in ourselves. So whatever we went through as a child, whatever our experiences was, there's nothing like the teen years in our own children to trigger those memories and send us into, sort of hypervigilance and really stepping up that caretaking and control. And so, for those parents, it's sort of a matter of stepping back and letting their children have some failures, but obviously not hurt themselves too much in a process. And that's a bit of a balancing act once they're teens. And with adult children, it literally is sometimes an exercise in teaching these mothers boundaries, to have healthy boundaries with their adult children, because there's just become so much, they've become enmeshed, and there's become so much caretaking and rescuing over the years that that's sort of the expectation, and they don't know how to stop it. So at the bottom of all of it, with all of these groups of parents, it's really about self-care and relearning what your values are and what your passions are, and sort of weaving those back into your life and taking yourself back from this sort of abyss that you've fallen into.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
So many things were just coming to my mind as you were speaking. And one of them is just how it's almost, this to keep yourself from becoming disconnected, to find your way back from being lost. On the surface, I can see how maybe some would think that means I'm not being a good mom. Like that struggle of just,
yes,
because I'm now I'm taking the focus off my child and I'm focusing on me. And I think just that shift from that, this is healthy, this is self-care, this helps me to be the best mom I can be. I mean, that's a big step, it would seem.
It is, and certainly because, the mothers who find themselves in this role tend to be, the nurturing, caretaking type, where they get their good feelings and their value from being of service to others. And, this is sort of an analogy that everyone's heard, but, on the airplane, on that oxygen mask yourself before you assist anyone else. And that really is what this is all about. If you are not breathing in oxygen, the care that you're giving others is diminished. You can't give as much from an empty cup. It sounds so simple, but it is. You're right, Lourdes. It is the hardest thing in the world for somebody who is accustomed to giving and not receiving. And it really is a journey in learning how to receive and how to have a balance between giving and receiving in order to take care of yourself and still be of service to others and not be burned out along the way.
Almost like being the good mother to themselves.
Yes. So I love that. That's absolutely it. Yes, it's like turning some of that nurture inward.
Yeah. And I was, when you mentioned how in the teen years, any traumas or unresolved challenges that the mother has, the teen years will bring that out, and she will struggle with that as she is trying to parent her teen. And again, that is doing your inner work or your self-care around the stuff that you need to heal and the stuff that you need to work through.
Yes, absolutely. It is. It's, there's nothing like teenagers to really, to really get that, really make that very clear. And oftentimes we're not even sure ourselves, what that is. We've repressed those traumas. We've buried those hurts and those pains. And so, when our children start experiencing some of that, then it becomes doubly hard. You've got these teenagers, and quite often too, and this is something I see a lot too, Lourdes, is the teen years coincide with menopause or perimenopause for women. And so, you've got this hormonal, what will I call it? I mean, just a crossfire, right? I mean, the parent, the mother, and the teenagers are all going through these hormonal shifts, and it just creates a level of chaos and craziness that is really hard to navigate sometimes.
And I can see too how, the mother's investment in her child, that the care that she is just pouring into this being, perhaps she is aware of this, perhaps she isn't, and it's more unconscious that caring for her child, being the best mother, helps her to avoid or distract herself from perhaps the stuff that she knows she needs to focus on. And so because she puts all of this into her child, you can see why it matters so much, why there's so much pressure on this, on this child, and this has to work out well, because it's almost as if the mother has, in a way, stepped into the life of her child and left hers behind.
That's beautifully said. And I think, the thing, Lourdes, too, is that very often, more often than not, the mother is absolutely not aware of this. I mean, this is all in the unconscious, right? So the more their child is struggling, the more they try to control it and fix it, and the more their child pulls away and tries to individuate, and then the more desperate the mother becomes because her child is no longer thriving. And so it's just this vicious cycle of, it never gets any better. I think, for anyone who's listening, who sort of recognizes that their child is struggling, they don't know why, I mean, just inviting you to sort of look inward. And that doesn't mean that the mother is being blamed for anything, right? I mean, I think there's this whole idea of, guilt and blame and shame. And no, because there's already so much shame in our society if your child doesn't fit the mold, right? Isn't, sort of quote unquote normal. I hate that word, but there's this idea that your child should do these milestones at a certain age, and they need to go to college, and every kid goes to college, and if you can't sit there in your book group and tell your book group people that your child is going to XYZ college, then somehow you failed. And so it's helping mothers sort of own their own story and then be able to be there for their children and hold those challenges and that space for them so that they can grow and be who they were meant to be, not necessarily who society wants them to be. I know we sort of got off track a bit there, but
no, it's fine.
But, it's all sort of interlinked. And I think, it's hard sometimes to pull or separate some of those things apart so that we can look at them more deeply and heal from them.
As you're talking, I was just thinking how really this lost in motherhood experience really is across, from baby to toddler to elementary to teen to adult. It really covers the lifespan of that child, because I have clients, who have adult children, and I can see how, when they talk about the empty nest syndrome or parents struggling with suddenly their children being off to college, how that space that the child used to fill up and no longer does can trigger or bring up a lot of anxiety for the mom.
Exactly, right? Because their role that they have been really nurturing over all those years is now suddenly gone. Yeah. And who are they without that role? So, yes, I mean, it manifests in so many different ways. And I think, when you were going back to infant toddler, this starts because the infant toddler journey it has its challenges, but for the most part, it's a very, very easy to lose yourself in that love, in that joy, in that, sort of overwhelming, miraculous sense of new life. And, then it just sort of grows from there, where now the stage is set, for that to sort of continue on. Like I said, it's just so insidious. It just happens so slowly and imperceptibly that you're not really aware of what's happened until problems start emerging.
And I was thinking about what you were saying about, the early years, the baby to toddler years, where there's this almost symbiotic exchange between mother and child of idealism and adoration and just mutual love and affection. And as the child grows and steps more into the world, the challenge really is to the mother, to the parents, to not seek that validation, to not seek those good feelings from the child. It's not the child's responsibility to make her feel happy or to make her feel good about herself.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because I know that as a mom, especially with the early years, it does feel amazing, when you have these moments with your child and it just feels like you're in this, amazing love fest.
It's exactly
right.
It's like this wonderful love affair with all, these feel-good hormones coursing your body, and who wouldn't want to keep hold of that, right? It's pretty wonderful.
Yeah. Wow, that's really insightful. So if you could say that there are any types of misconceptions, fears, or assumptions about motherhood that contribute to getting lost.
Gosh, I think one assumption, or not so much assumption, maybe it's more of a myth, is that there is such a thing as a perfect parent, because there isn't, or a perfect mother. I think society has sort of limited our idea of what motherhood means. I see that especially in the schools where they're pushing all children to move towards getting a college degree, and we're sort of doing a disservice to the children that don't fit that mold, which quite honestly is a huge percentage of children that are getting lost there.
Well, I think what you were saying was that there is this idea that motherhood should be the Facebook or Pinterest version, right? And it doesn't create space for the human experience of motherhood. And if mothers are held to this unrealistic standard, if mothers hold each other and hold themselves to that, then you also limit the child.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking about, what you said at the beginning, that you see a parallel between the struggles the children or teens that you work with are going through and the mother's own disconnection. So it just makes sense that the more connected a mother is to herself, the more she is living her life and focused on that creates space for her child to do the same.
Yes, exactly. That's beautifully said.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I can see how this work is just so important and so meaningful and so difficult at the same time.
It definitely can be messy, but it's profoundly, it is beautiful is a great word for it. I mean, it really is, it can be life-changing, not only for the mothers, but for their entire system, right? Their spouse or partner, their children. It sort of just opens up this space and allows everybody to sort of grow together. And I don't mean together like in an enmeshed way, but, that they're all growing in this space together, that they're all being allowed to have their own space. It's a beautiful thing, and it can be very challenging.
And I think too that why we think this, I don't know, but the idea that motherhood or parenting should not be difficult or it shouldn't be messy, when actually I think getting lost and being messy is the norm. Right?
But we don't talk about that, right?
Right.
Facebook, Pinterest, we've just got the pretty moments, and there's an awful lot about what goes wrong or behind the scenes. And I think that's a good sort of analogy for today's parenting. We do have this sort of perfect vision of what it means, and most of us don't live up to that, and that causes anxiety.
Yeah, because if you're around other moms who are, sharing how they baked, 3 dozen cupcakes and frosted them all and brought them to the school and did their yoga class and got their kids' science project, and they're fine, they're not stressed at all, then that doesn't allow room for any other moms to share their challenges. And then I think you start to hide and keep those to yourself. And even though it appears that you have this, group of mom friends, you're actually all fairly isolated.
No, I think that's absolutely true, Lois. And I sort of think when you were talking about the cupcakes and the frosting, I can promise you that most of those moms who are doing those things are also isolated and way more stressed than they look on the outside. They're doing everything that they think is right. They're performing in a way that society has told them they need to perform, and they are literally killing themselves. I mean, they're just overachieving, and they feel completely disconnected to other mothers as well.
And what you just shared made me think about how, like you said, mothers performing to a standard or expectations of what they feel society is telling them about what a good mother is, and they stop listening to their own intuition and their own instincts of, do I feel like making 3 dozen cupcakes? No. Okay. So maybe I shouldn't, right?
Yeah. Exactly
Yeah.
this, I mean, it's about listening to ourselves and what we need, and not trying to, make someone else happy or do the quote unquote right thing. Just because you signed up for something doesn't mean you have to follow through.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Schools demand a lot of parents these days. Signing up to volunteer in the classroom, signing up to, like you said, bringing cupcakes, or, and then there's out of school activities, because our children are so, involved in everything these days, and it just becomes overwhelming for the parent. It becomes a full-time job,
Yeah.
being involved in your children's activities.
And then you can see the pressure, because if you're a mom at a school where parents are expected to be very involved, if all the other moms are and you're not, that
suddenly you feel like an outsider, right?
Yeah. So, Kirsten, when you work with moms, what can that process look like?
Well, it's different for every mom, depending on, where they are and what their level of awareness is, as in how lost they have become in this process. But, the work revolves an awful lot around tuning in to yourself, learning how to receive, learning how to have healthy boundaries, learning how to practice self-care. And when I talk about self-care, some people are like, well, I don't have time for a massage, or I can't afford, whatever. But that's macro self-care, right? I mean, that's vacations and massages and getting off for a spa day. But I'm talking about micro self-care, little things that you can do throughout your day that may not take any more than 5 or 10 minutes, but that where you're tuning into yourself and allowing yourself a little bit of space, right, to be yourself and to discover and develop who you are, versus constantly being caring, being involved in someone else, taking care of others. And so it's really about helping mothers rediscover who they are. One of the ways I like to do that too is just connecting with their playfulness, right? Figuring out, where have you lost that? Because a lot of these mothers who become lost in motherhood become very serious and very task-oriented, and they sort of lost their joy and their playfulness in life, and everything just becomes this chore that eventually starts sort of draining them, and then they can't be themselves anymore. So, it's multifaceted, and it really, like I said, depends on the mother I'm working with as to how we approach, the work that we do together.
Kirsten, can you give some examples of what micro self-care can look like? Because I think that most moms are probably going to want to learn more about what that can be versus, like you said, the spa day or getting a massage, because, the micro care is what you can do in the moment, anytime throughout the day.
Absolutely. So when I think about micro self-care, they are things that don't cost any money, that don't take much time, that you can pretty much do anywhere. So things like connecting with your breath, just taking some deep breaths and reconnecting. It can be in the middle of an argument with your teenager, right? Just managing to center and, reset your nervous system, calm it down so that you can then respond in a healthy way from, your prefrontal cortex. It can be things like when you go to the bathroom and you're washing your hands, saying 3 things you're grateful for as you're washing your hand, and just sort of lifting your mood, or, how you're feeling about the way your day is going in that moment. It can be brewing a cup of tea, and instead of walking around the house or folding laundry while you're drinking that cup of tea, sitting down and maybe journaling a little bit, and drinking the tea in peace and quiet. So little things like that. There are certainly a lot more, but does that give you a sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I find myself doing is I will actually, when I can, try to go to work a little bit earlier so that before I actually start the workday, I can have anywhere from, sometimes it's only 10 minutes, maybe at the most 30, where I can breathe, I can sit in silence, I can read something that is non-motherhood and non-work related. And so sometimes I have to steal those moments, or if I'm home, just, telling the family that I'm going to go upstairs for 10 minutes and taking that time to just lay there in stillness and breathe, or to read.
And one of the things too I tell, working mothers is when you come home in the evening, when you're parking your car in the driveway, just sit there for a couple of minutes and tune in with yourself. How are you feeling? Where are you feeling it in your body? How can you just look after yourself by just intentionally sending some breath to those areas, or just focusing on yourself for a few minutes before you walk in that door? Because the minute you're going to walk in that door, someone's going to want something from you. And there you go again,
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, they might even be looking out the window for you.
Right?
Yeah. Yes.
Maybe park your car around the block.
Yeah.
And take your 5 minutes there.
Exactly. So, Kirsten, if we have a listener right now who is resonating with this experience of being lost, what would some words of wisdom be for her?
Oh my gosh. First of all, just you are not alone. You are so not alone. There is a massive community of other mothers that feel just the same. And so, reach out there and, connect with others and start looking after yourself. Join my community, Lost in Motherhood. It's a free community and resource where, you can join on Facebook. You can go to my website and, just learn a little bit more about how you can start taking your life back.
Kirsten, what is the best way that listeners could get in touch with you and learn more about the Lost in Motherhood resource that you've created and other things that you might be able to share with them?
Absolutely. Thanks, Lourdes. So I think, if you're in Fort Collins or the Northern Colorado area, then my practice is pathfinderscounselingllc.com. And, I obviously do counseling for families and individuals in my practice there. And then the Lost in Motherhood community is lostinmotherhood.com. And from there, you can just click on join the community and it'll take you right to the Facebook page.
Kirsten, thank you so much for your time today, for sharing your wisdom, your deep insights. I know as a mom, I really got a lot out of our conversation, and I feel like so many listeners are also going to feel this support, and your message is going to resonate with them.
Gosh, well, thank you for having me, Lourdes. It's always such a pleasure chatting with you.
Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Kirsten. What stood out for me is the connection between the struggles our children are experiencing and our own sense of being lost, and that being lost in motherhood, as Kirsten described, means being disconnected from ourselves, losing our identity because of the focus and the energy that's put into being a parent, being a good mother. What also stood out for me is how the more that a woman begins to pay attention to her own self, begins to connect back to who she is, the better able she is to provide the space for her child to unfold. And so there's a definite connection between the mother being connected to her own identity and the child being able to blossom and thrive. For more information on today's episode and for show notes, please visit www.lourdesfiato.com/women in depth, where you will find links to all the resources mentioned. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.